All right, what is up, ghouls, gamers, and goblins? Potato Bagel here. Been a while, and this video really did not help with that. I'm sorry, but I may have cooked, or I'm extremely stupid, which is also likely. So, you're looking at this video, you know exactly what it is. It's a set based on Hoenn, not a themed booster pack, not a little promo pack, an entire set. As of the time of recording this, I'm still not done with it. So Editor Me is going to put up the number of cards on screen that I made. And now that's a lot of cards. And, I hinted at this earlier. I got two packs for this, obviously Groudon and Kyogre. And, I think once we go through this, you'll understand which ones, are going to belong to which pack. I mean, I think it makes sense. There's a lot of ideas that I wanted to experiment with. And I wanted to make sure that there were enough supporters to, help, not really help every type, but enough supporters to create some unique deck ideas. So with that, let's just jump right into it. All right, hello, ghouls, gamers, and goblins. Potato Bagel here. I seem to have misplaced my phone stand, so instead you're just gonna get the very jarring JPEG that blinks occasionally. So here we are. This is PokeCardGenerator.com. This is one of the best websites I found to replicate. I shouldn't say replicate, to create Pokemon cards in the style of TCG Pocket. And so, just jumping right into it. Obviously, this whole set is held. So right here we have Rico. Pretty standard. It's got quick, colorless. Grovyle has Mega Drain. And there's two versions of Sceptile because I figured with the Bola starter that there would be, one version of each in each different pack, one Groudon pack, the other pack, that type of thing. And so, I feel like the Sceptile is really what matters. The rest of the line. So, it's 2 energy to attack, which makes it very rare candy friendly. Obviously, this one has Leaf Blade, flip a coin, do more damage, attack on par with that. But the other one has Grass Blade. And this is a very interesting idea that I kind of wanted to see. And so, even though the move was introduced black and white, the region, it's pretty much one of the signature moves of the starters. And so what it does is it's 60 damage, but it does 30 more damage if you have a Blaziken or Swampert on your bench. Or I should say for each. Basically meaning if Sceptile is in your active zone and you have 2 Blaziken and a Swampert on your bench, that's 30 each. That would mean that this attack does 150 damage. Now, obviously, that seems ridiculous, but at the cost of having stage twos completely decking out your bench, yeah, I think that's worth it. And obviously, I think if you wanted a bit more optimized, is that you would really only want two starters. So maybe you do Sceptile and Blaziken or Blaziken Swampert, something like that. So moving up to Torchic, something similar. It's a colorless energy. You do Fury Swipes. It's multiplicative damage. Same thing with Combustion Double Kick. Blaziken's Blaze Kick, however, also burns. That's the standard one. And then obviously Fire Play. Same thing, just with Sceptile and Swampert on the bench. And then lastly for, Mudkip, Tackle for 20, Mud Bomb. Muddy Water, 60, 10 to pretty standard, and then Water Play. And here, going on with the, you have two supporters, Brendan and May. Brendan allows your Sceptile, Blaziken, and Swampert. Which I think that's fair. We just got How in EV Grove, who does the EX version of starters. So obviously this isn't too insane. But May is really like the bread and butter of the combined starter deck. That is because it allows you to allows you to attach an energy to your energy zone to your Sceptile, Blaziken, or Swampert that matches the type of that Pokemon. So you attach a water energy to Swampert, or a grass energy to Sceptile. And this alone makes the consistency of the deck so much more potent because they only need two energy, one of which is colorless, the other one matches their type. And so the ability to just get that for free is so nice. Now, moving on, we have, Poochyena in a Mightyena EX. There's no particular order to which I made these cards. It feels like it's gonna be Pokedex order, but it's really just what popped in my mind. And so I'm also gonna rely on you guys and hope that since Eevee Grove just came out, there might be some overlapping ideas. I tried to double check to make sure that some Pokemon that I had in here that also in Eevee Grove didn't have like two similar ideas going on. So we have Poochyena, who just does Howl. It's not quite like Growl, because Growl decreases your opponent's damage. This reduces the amount of damage you take. So like on paper, it's the same thing, but it functions differently. And then we have Mightyena EX. And this is a very fun idea that I had, where the weaker move, Snarl, is the one that has the effect that you might want to use. So in this case, Snarl, decreases the damage done by your opponent's active Pokemon. And then obviously it has 390, pretty bog standard. And the reason for this, as you will see, but we have a more dark cards up here. So we have Poochyena Mightyena EX, which is what you want in the active slot. And then we have Cacnea and Cacturn, as well as Corphish into Crawdaunt. So these are going to be additional dark cards that, in my mind, you would want to pair with Mightyena, or maybe any other dark card. But I made these ones with these are just going to be tossed in with the Mightyena. You're kind of like doing the solo missions. So Cacturn here prevents the defending Pokemon attacking, and Crawdaunt prevents the defending Pokemon from retreating. Some pretty nasty stuff. Obviously, I don't think the white are that powerful. And Cacnea and Corphish being grass and water respectively in a dark deck, colorless energy. But the kicker for this is Sydney, the dark member of the Elite Four. As a supporter, attacks used by your opponent's active Pokemon deal -10 damage for each dark Pokemon on your bench. If you have 3 dark Pokemon on your bench, that's already -30 damage. Pair that with the Mightyena, and all of a sudden your opponent's active is going to do 50 less damage. And what that means is they're either going to have to force themselves to retreat, get rid of the effect, or they're just going to hit you for significantly less damage. And this is huge, especially for a dark deck, because these are actual dark types that are weak to grass, meaning something like Buzzwole, who already OHKOs Mightyena with big Mightyena having 140 HP, 50 less damage. That's something. Now we got Zigzagoon here, who does 20 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Linoon, for 3 energy, does 50 damage. Nothing crazy. Spinda got Dizzy Punch, 2 energy, 40 damage. Now Confused. I think that makes sense. Slackoth, kind of iffy on the secondary effect for Scratch here, where it just says during your next turn, you can't use Scratch. I mean, it's like the Truant thing. And obviously, if you evolve into Vigoroth here, I think it should go away anyway. So this is nothing. Probably I could probably get rid of that. Let me know what you guys think. At Vigoroth, 2 energy, slash for 70, pretty decent. And then we have Slacking, Giga Impact. This, makes sense to have the Truant effect, during your next turn. This Pokemon can't use Giga Impact. Makes sense. However, what's really fun here is Norman as the supporter for this. Is that during this turn, each energy attached to your Slacking, Linoon, and Spinda provides 2 energy. So yeah, it's just, it's like Mythical Island Superior just for these Pokemon, just for this turn. I think that's not crazy because, I mean, if you think about it, that means you can get away with having 2 energy. You can rare candy your Slakoth, train to Slacking, have 2 energy on it, use Norman. Next thing you know, you use Giga Impact. Can't attack on your next turn anyway, so you take the hit, hatch energy, then on your next turn, you can use Norman again to, basically have your retreat cost something else if you want. Oh, what do we have next? Oh, okay. Sableye EX is something so ridiculous. Thief and Fling do the exact same thing, but the opposite, if that makes sense. They do opposite. They're like it's the same thing, but in 2 different directions. Thief takes your opponent's Pokemon tool, and Fling tosses your Pokemon. And the reason you would want to do this is you can see we have some Pokemon tools here. Is it's just obviously like we have something like Guzma that gets rid of your opponent's active tools, but there's no Pokemon tools that really feel negative that you would want to use to give to your opponent. And so that's kind of what the point of this is. Then I made a Zangoose and Survivor just because there's they'd want to be Zangoose wants to be poisoned, Survivor can poison, works like that. The reason for this is one of the most obvious ones is the Toxic Horde. If the Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot, it now gets poisoned. That makes sense. You can put this on Sableye, ing it, and then now your opponent's active Pokemon is going to get poisoned. Or you hit them with, something like the Sticky Barb, where at the end of every turn they take 10 damage, similar to Glaceon EX's. Then the third Pokemon tool here is the Twisted Spoon. I thought it was a neat idea where, if you attach this to a Psychic Pokemon and it gets knocked out, the opponent takes 10 damage for each Psychic energy on your Psychic Pokemon. So, for example, here we have Solrock and Lunatone, who, with a Pokemon tool equipped, take less damage. Obviously, each move they have requires free energy. Solrock does it to the active, Lunatone bench. So, if they have the Twisted Spoon equipped and they were to get knocked out, the opponent would take 30 damage back because they have 3 psychic energy. Obviously, you pair that with Tate and Liza, where, you know, take a psychic energy, put it onto the Solrock or Lunatone, and then they can actually attack faster. Then for another psychic card, I went with Grumpig EX here. I don't know why. I just thought it was goofy and stupid. And I think we needed a better stage 1 psychic EX than Magius. So basically, has psychic noise, base 100 damage, but on heads it does 20 more, on tails it does less. So, it's either 80 or 120. Spoiling does the same thing just with a weaker move. It's 30 damage, either 10 more or 10 less. Then we got C dot, 2 energy. We got Harden, so prevents damage. Got Nuzleaf, and then into Shiftry EX. Leaf Storm is essentially Palkia's move, but it's better because, well, it's on a stage 2, and I think Grass Energy is a little bit harder to come by. It's a little bit harder to ramp. I'd say you would probably put Superior in this, maybe use Leafeon EX to power it up. But I think, 130 damage, 20 to the bench, and then you discard 2 Grass Energy. I think that's perfectly fair. I just think it's a nice, solid stage 2. Nothing that's bulky like Venusaur. And obviously, to make up for the fact that I chose not to have EX versions of the starters. I think Shiftry, kind of helps out with what you would want Sceptile to be if someone wanted to be Sceptile EX. Then into Ludicolo here as well. Only 3 energy. I might change that. I don't know. I might change it to 4. 3 energy, 130. Just discard a water energy. Nothing crazy. I mean, you do kind of have to sustain your water energy on below to keep doing damage. But it doesn't damage the bench. It only discards 1 water energy. So I think it's like you don't need Misty, you don't need Manaphy. It's still, pretty strong water damage, and I think that's something that is needed right now. And Torkoal EX. When I designed this Torkoal EX and as well as Flannery as the supporter, I didn't know Torkoal was going to be in Eevee Grove, but the fact that Torkoal is in Eevee Grove makes this idea so much funnier because it works so well. So Torkoal EX has White Smoke, where if you discard a fire energy, you take 30 less damage until your next turn. And then for an attack, it has Overheat for 2 fire energy, 1 colorless, 120 damage, and you discard fire energy. So, as a fire type, Torkoal is doing a lot of discarding of its energy, one of which is defensive with ability. And that's where Flannery comes in, where you attach 2 fire energy from your discard pile, not your energy zone, your discard pile, to Torkoal EX. Now, obviously, my idea was that you had Torkoal EX in the front line. You just basically stacking White Smoke. And then you use Flannery. You get that 2 energy back. You attach the 1 from the energy zone. And then next thing you know, you can attack with Overheat. That was kind of my point. And obviously, now that we have Flareon EX, it works doubly well because Torkoal, discards that energy. You could then Flareon if you wanted to. That kind of thing. And now for the big boy. We have Kyogre EX. My idea for, I guess, Kyogre and Groudon, although really Team Aqua and Team Magma, was for it to be like the classic Team Aqua versus Team Magma set. So Kyogre and Groudon kind of have somewhat busted abilities, as they kind of feel like the head honchos. But hear me out. Kyogre, you can only have one of it in play immediately. And then once per turn, you can either bring it to the active spot, kind of like Solgaleo, or you can attach a water energy to one of your water Pokemon. This also includes Kyogre. I originally thought about having it be your bench Pokemon, but the text wouldn't fit completely. So I just was like, you know what, I'll just leave it as one of your Pokemon, one of your water Pokemon. And for 4 energy, it does 120 damage, which is pretty solid. But it also does 30 more damage to fighting Pokemon. And if you use Archie, it does 40 more damage. So basically, if you Archie and Kyogre, you could do 160 damage, which is nice. Or, it gets bumped up to 190 if you on a fighting Pokemon. And then for additional water types, we have Wailord and Sharpedo. Now, Wailord was a really fun idea here, because obviously with Kyogre, you can ramp water energy, either on itself or onto your bench. And with Wailord's Water Spout, for 3 energy, I think this is a nice way of, like, you could put Misty in this deck, and it will still be really fun. Because Water Spout for 3 water energy, you discard all of that energy, but this attack does damage equal to Wailord's current HP plus 10 for every discarded energy. So immediately, at max HP, 130 HP, and 3 water energy, you're doing 160 damage. And then all that energy is gone. And I think that it's and I think it's a really fun effect. Because like you would think, oh, Kyogre wants to be the energy spike. No, it's Werelord. And Kyogre is just powering it up. And then you also have Carvana and Sharpedo, who are kind of like your precursor in case you don't want to have Kyogre out right away. It's just 2 energy with Aqua Jet 30 and 30, to the active and the bench. And then we have Team Aqua Grunt. Now I have it with Sharpedo or Wailord. I may change it to Carvana and Wailmer, similar to the Team Galactic Grunt, where they pull the basic. But I think pulling the stage 1 would just help a lot better, especially if you have, if you are running this whole deck, you're going to have so many basics. So I think you want to clear your basics with the Pokeball, use the grunts to then get the stage 1 set up and in time, that kind of thing. Now we got the Team Magma side of it, where we have Groudon, who is a fighting type. Exact same thing, just with fighting Pokemon, and it does 30 more damage to water Pokemon. You see what I'm going for here? It's like Groudon fighting Kyogre, where it should do 150 damage, which is just enough to one-shot each other. But anything else, it's not going to. We have Maxi plus 40 damage, and I went with Camerupt here. It's kind of sad that one of the only other fire types, in the deck had to be, turned into its ground type, its fighting type for this. But given that Camerupt is used by Team Magma, I think it fits really well. It's the exact same thing, just as Wailord here with Eruption. And then Baltor and Claydol sort of serve that Torpedo role, although this is 40 to the active and 10 to each bench, so it's slightly different. And then we have the Team Magma Grunt. And then we got Rayquaza. Now we have a Dragon Rayquaza. So, it has Delta Stream. If this Pokemon is in the active spot, all of your Pokemon take minus 20 damage from your opponent's from your water and fighting Pokemon. From opposing water and fighting Pokemon. And then for Fire, Lightning, and a colorless, 100 damage, 10 itself. I don't know, it seemed pretty basic. And I feel like, if this were to be a real set, that would come out, I think fighting would still be on top. Like, fighting's doing really well right now, just in general. So I think something like Rayquaza having a defensive option, against fighting. Same thing with that 1-star Raptor that nobody's using. And then obviously Kyogre having that offensive pressure onto fighting types. It might help. Then we got Altaria EX. Wablu has Sing, puts it to sleep. Echoed Voice, it's the Crabominable thing where you use like a Crabominable or Togekiss, use the move. And it does double damage basically. But with Cotton Guard, all of your Pokemon take minus 10 damage attacks for each bench Pokemon you have. And I say this effect doesn't stack, meaning that if you have multiple Altaria, because it doesn't specify active or bench slot, basically, this is just going to happen. Only one of this is active. So if Altaria EX is in play and you have a filled out bench, it's going to do minus 30 damage. Then I came up with the Mawile EX because we had Sableye EX. So something slightly different, Bite and Jawbreaker, and which is going to discard the opponent's Pokemon tool. I don't think we have anything other than Guzma that gets rid of Pokemon tools, so I had it on a coin flip. Again, any ideas that you guys have, I'm open to hearing it. Some of these are probably bound to change. This took me a while to go through every single Pokemon and come up with something, so the balance only exists in my head. So just let me know what you guys think. Then we have Medicham EX. This is one I wanted so badly because we have so many fighting types, especially like the rock types that use so much energy. And like, yeah, we have Groudon too, but this, like with Medicham, like you could just throw this into like anything. Like it, key focus. You take a fighting energy from your zone, attach it to this Pokemon. It's so needed. Like I would honestly, I'm a huge fan of Regirock. Like that card, I wanted to use that card. I used it in a Glade deck a while back, and it like kind of worked, but it was just hard getting Regirock online, especially when it's so defensive. So I think having this sort of ramping fighting types will be super helpful. It also has high jump kick, 140 damage. But if you get tails on the coin flip, you do 20 damage to yourself. I think valid. Then we have Aggron. Now I was kind of torn on what to do with Aggron because I could just leave it at its move, but I think I wanted to give it an ability as well. And a lot of the abilities that I came up with, aside from a lot of the abilities I came up with have to do with Pokemon tools because I think um it was kind of a disappointment of mine with Space Time Smackdown that Pachirisu and Skarmory were the only cards that had direct synergy by having a Pokemon tool equipped. So I kind of wanted to see more of that. So you saw it with Solrock and Lunatone, now with Aggron, where if they have a tool equipped, take a little bit less damage. I think it's super helpful as it's sort of like it adds defensive pressure in a way that doesn't feel intrusive to the way someone would want to play the game. Like we have blue as a supporter, but nobody really uses that. So I think by adding this sort of passive defensive abilities, it might be interesting. But for Aggron's move, we have Heavy Slam. And it took me a bit to figure out how to word this, but this attack does 10 more damage for each energy more in your retreat cost than the defending Pokemon. Aggron has a retreat cost of 3. Most Pokemon tend to have about 1 or 2. And if you equip it with the Iron Ball? Yeah, the Iron Ball. Then Aggron's retreat cost will increase 4, which will allow Heavy Slam to do more damage. It's a really weird and stupid idea, but I love it. Then we got Plusle and Minun. And this is okay. I really love this because this helps a lot of lightning cards. We just got Tapu Koko, who is like our first really decent lightning EX. But with Plusle and Minun, if you put these on the bench, your active Pokemon will do 10 more damage each. So basically, Plusle increases the damage done by the lightning Pokemon by 10, as does Minun. But if you have Minun in the active spot, plus this ability is going to increase Minun's damage by 20 and vice versa. So these effects only really kind of pop once. If you have Plusle in your active spot as well as an additional Plusle in a Minun, then its damage is going to increase by 30 because that's 20 from minus because it has plus, as well as the 10 from plus standard. And so these effects only proc once. So across all your lightning Pokemon, this is a way of having a flat like 20 damage buff, which is really nice. Here we go. Now we have more flying types. Okay. So I was waiting on. So we have Swellow here with Tailwind. As long as this Pokemon is on your bench, your active Pokemon retreat cost is 1 less. This effect does not stack. Shaman Sky does this, but only for basics, and people have since stopped using Shaman Sky. I think it's natural for a stage 1 to kind of have the 1-up on that, so this is, in a general sense, just a better version. Like, maybe if it was a stage 2, like, yeah, definitely, that would make more sense. But there's not many stage 2 flying types in Hoenn, so I just went with Swellow. And it's really helpful, especially since a lot of the other cards only have, 1 retreat. Means they can retreat for free. Then we got Wingull and Pelipper. I opted for a colorless because they're flying as opposed to water. Wingull just 2 energy, 40 damage, Pelipper 3, 60 damage, and 20 more for each of your bench Pokemon, meaning that this would deal 120 damage max. And then we have Winona, who is sort of like the supporter that covers Pokemon, where it's Swablu, Talo, or Wingull. So you just draw a random Swablu, Talo, or Wingull from your hand. And this is kind of the effect I wanted to go for, where Pelipper wants, more bench Pokemon to do more damage. Altaria, know, pre- prevents more damage the more bench Pokemon you have. And then Swellow is kind of like a useful tool to swap in between one, two. Alrighty, then we have Wally, who is a freaking game changer. This is the exact effect that Wally has in the normal card game. You play this you play this on top of one of your Pokemon, and you draw its direct evolution from your deck, and you play it on top of that Pokemon. Now, with my wording here, is that you draw its evolution from your deck into your hand, and then you have the option of playing that evolution, even if that Pokemon was played this turn. So basically, if you're going first, and obviously you start with the basic, and you have Wally in your hand, you can use Wally turn 1 and say evolve your Charmander into Charmeleon. And then that way, you have that Charizard EX that you don't want to wait for the rare candy for, that type of thing. But it also, I think this really helps a lot of stage 1 Pokemon, especially something like Magikarp, where you play the Magikarp, you play Wally, and you get Gyarados immediately. Because Magikarp is prone to getting bench sniped. So I think this is a huge, huge game changer. And it's kind of exactly what I wanted, because the other option was kind of trying to do something with Gardevoir or Gallade, because that's kind of like Wally's signature Pokemon, but I couldn't really think of anything. So I looked up what it did, in the normal TCG, and this is what it does, and it's amazing, and I love it. And, with something like Rare Candy, that is an item that requires you to have the Pokemon at its normal evolution pacing, so it's placed the previous turn, as well as having it do. Wally works with every Pokemon that evolves, and it bypasses that evolution timer. And so I think that's a perfectly good use of your one supporter per turn. Um, okay, then we got Breloom EX. So I was like, you know what? Why not? Let's do Breloom. Everybody loves Breloom. And so it has Effect Sport, which your puts the attacking Pokemon to either sleep, paralysis, or poisoned, that kind of thing. And then it does 40 damage to the active 40 bench. Something pretty decent. We got Makuhita and Hariyama, who are multiplicative coin flips. So this is 10 times for each heads on 3 coins. And this is flip a coin until we get tails, doing 40 times. And then we have Brawly here, who is basically Adamant, but for fighting types. That's it. It's just all your fighting Pokemon take 20 less damage. There's a lot of fighting cards. Obviously, you got the rock types, the ground types, the actual fighting types. So, like, this affects a lot, and I think it's something really solid that will help a lot of maybe underused fighting types. Then we have Ralts here. We have a full psychic line of Ralts. I used this a while back at another video. I made custom cards, and it uses a similar effect on Curlia. And it really is the only other thing I can think of, because the damage curve on the Curlia cards we have in Pocket are kind of weird. Where I believe we have 2 colorless doing 20 damage, and then a psychic and a colorless doing 30 damage. So I kind of just tacked on one more colorless to do 40 damage. Then we have the Gallade here, who does 70 damage, and it does 10 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon for each energy attached, which is similar to what Tapu Lele does. Then Gardevoir EX, who does 40 damage plus 10 to the bench, and then 70 damage plus 20 more damage for each energy Pokemon. So it hits the bench, and then it has kind of like the psychic move, basically like Alakazam, like the Mythical Island Executor, Bronzong, Galadiax does the same thing. For Salamence, I wanted to try something different with the dragon types, where Salamence obviously needs water and fire energy. That is a standard, but I wanted for Bagon and Shelgon to have two different moves depending on which energy had attached. So you have for Bagon, it doesn't make much of a difference. It's Bite and Ember, the exact thing. But for Shelgon, Guard Press, which prevents some damage, and then Reckless Charge, which does some damage itself. Kind of like a defensive and offensive option. And then it kind of converges on Salamence, who does 120 damage. And if you flip tails, you are now confused. That was kind of my point. What I wanted to try. Then we have Drake, who increases all damage done by your dragon types by 30. I think it's a nice solid. Everybody wants to throw out Lance. I know I made a Lance card a while back. Made a Lance card that you kind of want to attach the energy you want. So I figured with Drake, hey, why not just make it a nice, damage boost? All right, Electric and Manectric. Electric, charge, take energy from energy zone, attach to this Pokemon. Simple. Manectric has rising voltage. For 90 damage, or it does 90 damage, but if you have 2 more lightning energy, this attack does 50 more damage. Basically, 5 energy, 140 damage. So charge helps you, curve into Manectric better. And then with Watson here, this was a very interesting way to do this because with Lieutenant Surge and Volkner, they're both lightning supporters, but with specific Pokemon. I wanted something a bit more general. So I decided that any attacks used by your lightning Pokemon that deal over 100 damage basically generate a lightning energy. So with something like Manectric, where Rising Voltage does base 90, if you have Plusle and Minun on your bench, that's going to bring it to 110. So you pop Watson, do 110 damage, you get that bonus energy from Watson. You now at 4 energy on Manectric, plus the 5th one on your next turn, and now all of a sudden you're doing 140 damage. Then we have the Wurmple line, does call for family. Put a random card that evolves for Wurmple. Your hand, so you have Silcoon and Beautifly. Kind of like a somewhat weaker version of Butterfree. Its attack Silverwind does 50 damage, and that's what does the healing as opposed to just an ability. Then we have Cascoon and Dustox, who do a lot of poison. I think, Dustox hits the bench as well. We have Chimecho, who does 40 damage and prevents your opponent from healing. We have Tropius, who is one I had to go back and change since Eevee Grove dropped. So now if this Pokemon has a Pokemon tool attached, once per turn you can heal 30 damage from it, and it has, 2 energy, 50 damage. This was 3 for 80, but we just got the one that has 3 colorless for 70, and I'm like, that's a little similar. Try to change it. Oh, we have Skitty and Delcatty. This one, okay, so Skitty is the multiplicative one. Flip 2 coins, 20 damage per. With Delcatty, it's flip 5 coins, and it does 10 more damage for each heads with the base of 50. Surskit and Masquerain, I wanted to, do Intimidate. They both are they're grass cards, but they use colorless energy. I think it's just something to slot into just about any deck, really, especially with Intimidate, where if this Pokemon is in play, attacks used by your opponent. If you have 2 of these, it doesn't say it doesn't stack, which means that if you have 2 of these, that's now decreased by 20. That easily just negates any red or beastite or anything. Uh, and then we got Feebas in Milotic. Feebas does the exact same thing as Magikarp. Then we have Milotic, who, yeah, this one's kind of, while this Pokemon is affected by a status condition, it takes minus 20 attacks. Then we have Hydro Pump for 2 energy. I think this is oddly similar to what we just got in Primarina EX. Although I think the effect is more grander, so it has 3 extra energy to 70 more damage, meaning 5 energy, 120, which is nice. Then Wallace as a supporter is, I think, a nice boost for water cards. Especially compared to something like Irida. Like Irida, you could put into a colorless deck that just runs, water energy, and that's fine. With Wallace, this explicitly wants to be used with water Pokemon. So it heals 70, but it discards a water energy. So I think this very much plays into what water energy does, which is sort of build up energy. With this like Hydro Pump effect, wants to do more, but it's sort of used as like a currency with some other, very high end effects. So healing 70, that's a lot of damage. That's a lot of health back. So that was kind of my point with that. Um, oh, then we got Ninkata, Shedinja, Ninjask. Pretty basic. Shedinja is really funny. 70 HP. But if any damage is done to this Pokemon by attacks, flip a coin. If heads, this Pokemon takes no damage from that attack. I think with 70 HP, um, oh yeah, and with Shadow Bind 50 damage, this Pokemon also takes 10 damage. But I wanted to specify that it does not trigger Wonder Guard, meaning this Pokemon will always take 10 damage in return. So even if like you have this in the active and it doesn't take a hit, it's going to end up, dealing damage to itself in some capacity. Then we have Gulpin and Swalot, who, if they have a Pokemon tool attached, they do more damage. I think it's nice seeing a poison type that doesn't really want to do poison. It's just a lot of damage. A Relicanth. This was a really fun idea. This was originally its attack fin swipe was originally going to be fighting in colorless, but it made it double colorless to help a lot more. And once per turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, add a random fossil from your deck to your hand. This is going to be so helpful, especially since we have the 2 new fossils right here. Obviously, the Claw and Root fossil. I decided for Anorith and Armaldo to be grass types and Lileep and Cradily to be fighting types. I think it'd be different from what most people would expect. That's fun. Armaldo, Battle Armor, again, if it has a tool, it takes less damage and it does a solid 90. With Cradily, if it has a tool, this Pokemon may not be forcibly switched out. So Sabrina doesn't work. Cyrus won't work. And that's if it has a tool equipped, meaning that, I think this really incentivizes. I think a lot of these defensive options really incentivize Guzma a lot more, which is nice because Guzma's kind of feels hit or miss sometimes. At least in my opinion, I could very much be wrong. Well, with Cradili's attack, it's kind of a wall of text here, but it does 70 damage, 10 to each bench Pokemon, and it heals 10 for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So it it really like sucks 10 HP from your opponent's bench while dealing 70 to the active. Forgot how stupid this look. Can you guys tell graphic design is my passion here with Xploud EX? Um, I thought this was kind of a neat effect to have with Cacophony. Once during your turn, you may do 20 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon at random. I think this is nice. With 4 energy, obviously 130, it's not going to hit anything for super effective damage. The 130 is still really solid, but doing 20 damage at random to a bench, can't really go wrong with that. Not quite, obviously, as good as Greninja, but it's still something. Then we have Volbeat and Illumise. I am open to having these be changed. These are the exact same effect, basically just with each other, which I kind of wanted, like, because obviously they're basics, and it makes the needle, yeah, like the needle queen effect from Genetic Apex a little bit better. Where obviously with Volbeat, if you have Illumise on your bench, this attack does more damage, and with Illumise, if you have Volbeat on your bench, its attack does more damage. Like that makes sense, but I feel like both don't need to have it. So I'm open to ideas if you have them in the comments. Then we have Nose Pass and Probopass, where Probopass does 60 damage to the active, 60 to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon, but it can attack on its next turn. But with Roxanne, if your active Pokemon is Relicanth or Probopass, you may switch it with any of your bench Pokemon. This doesn't decrease their retreat. This is, it's like with Solgaleo's effect, where using its ability doesn't count as you retreating. So using the supporter doesn't count as you retreating. Meaning with something like Relicanth, if you have a fossil on your bench, and then you have Probopass who does 60 to everything, and then it can't attack, and then you Roxanne into one of your fossils, discard the fossil, then you can do it again. Or obviously, if you're running solo Relicanth, you know, this allows you to get Relicanth out of there for whatever, fossil you wanted to get online. Most likely Rampardos. Then we have Roselia and Roserade, who have, with Poison Point, where if they get hit, it's like the Poison Barb as an ability, so you could put a Leaf Cape on it instead, and then obviously more damage if the active Pokemon poisoned. Solid. Then we have Flygon here, who I made a fighting type, not a dragon type. But if this Pokemon has a Pokemon tool attached, its retreat cost is 2 less. I think that's really solid. Absol here was a little bit of a weird one. I think the effect is cool. I just don't know if it's cool. There's nothing like it. So with Sucker Punch, you do 30 damage, but when your opponent goes to attack you, you flip a coin, and on heads, they take 30 more damage. So for one energy that's pretty decent, I'd say potentially 60 damage. But I don't know how effective this will be. Barboach and Whiscash, who have the Celebi and Golden Go effect, but for each water energy. Again, I think this is a valid reason to put Misty in a deck. I wanted to make sure there were water cards that didn't need Misty, and then maybe try something new with water cards that would want Misty. So with Whiscash, it flips a coin for each water energy, and it does 20 damage for heads. That's fine. Kecleon is a really fun thing. But with color change, when you take damage from an attack, you copy the type and weakness from the attacking Pokemon. Just why not? I don't think it really does anything. Might be helpful when you're going up against a fighting deck. That way you're no longer weak fighting. Um, or maybe it'll be helpful. If you're fully expecting going into a grass deck, then you can color change and then put a leaf cape on Kecleon, that type of thing. Then with Palette Overdrive, this attack does 20 more damage for each different energy type attached to this Pokemon. I mean, it seemed neat just because, there's not a reason to run multiple energy unless it's like a dragon deck. So I figured, with a normal type, it might be helpful. Base 30. So if you have, obviously in a mono energy deck, it'd be 50. In 2, it'd be 70. With 3, it'd be 90. But I think that's solid enough, especially with, HP. It's not bad. Love Disc does Confusion for 20 damage. I think all the Confusion effects do low damage. So that's kind of the good thing about Confusion. Why not and Wobbuffet? So we have... Yeah, okay. So with why not is a Gen 3 Pokemon. Wobbuffet is not. So I had to include why not to evolve into Wobbuffet. And weirdly enough, in Space Time Smackdown, we did not get a Chingling or Chimecho, so I chose not to include Chingling because that's a Gen 4 Pokemon and Chimecho is a Gen 3, and the set is primarily Gen 3 with it. So I wanted to, even if the Pokemon already has a card, make a new copy of it for this set. And so that's kind of my point here. So we have why not evolving into Wobbuffet, and I think that makes Wobbuffet slightly better. Or it makes it so Wobbuffet could be slightly better because it's a stage 1. So it has 120 HP, and when this Pokemon is knocked out from an opponent's attack, deal that damage back to the attacking Pokemon. Again, you could put a Rocky Helmet on this, you could put the Twisted Spoon on this because it's a Psychic card. You could deal a lot of damage back to the attacking Pokemon for Wobbuffet, and it's kind of like the most Wobbuffet thing. I think it's helpful. Clamperl. 10 damage with Clamp, and the defending Pokemon can't retreat. This might be really helpful because we don't see this effect on a lot of basics. It's typically, like Arbok. There's a stage 1s I had. I think it was Groudon that had this. It may have been Cacturne. Then we have Huntail and Gorbis. Now this is really weird. Only because they both kind of do the same thing. I just don't know which one's going to be better. Huntail takes a energy from your discard pile to attach to one of your Pokemon on a coin flip, whereas Gorbis does it from the energy zone. I feel, with something like that Banette card that prevents energy from the energy zone, obviously that's gonna stop Gorbis, but with Huntail, if you don't have energy in your discard pile, it's not gonna work. Then we have Shuppet and Banette. I know made a I made a version of this Banette card. I wanted to redo it because it's really fun. Where once per turn, you may damage this Pokemon for half its current HP and also deal that damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. Because I made this card and I put it in a community post. I don't think I put it in a video. So this is what I wanted to do. So with 100 HP, you use it once, you take 50, the opponent's active takes 50. When you're at 50 and you use it, you take 30, your opponent's active takes 30, and then at that point you'd be at 20, so then you take 10, your opponent's active takes 10. It gets worse over time, so you want to use it immediately. And that pair is really helpful with Duskmar EX, where once per turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, this Pokemon takes 30 damage, and you may heal one of your bench Psychic Pokemon for 60 damage. So with Banette wanting to take damage to deal damage to your opponent's active, Duskmar EX can take damage and to heal Banette, and then you can also have the Space Time Smackdown Duskmar to then take the damage, based on the rest of it. And then with Phoebe, I wanted to go with something ghosting, but because Ghost and Psychic are like the same thing, I had to come up with something. But choose one Psychic Pokemon from your discard pile and add it to your hand. I think this is obviously it's a better version of Celestic Town Elder, but it's type specific, so it makes sense why you would have that control factor over it. And it also kind of makes sense with the Ghost theme, where with something like Banette, who is most likely going to go down, you can then, choose to take the Banette out of your discard pile and, maybe put it onto the other Shuppet. Then we have Spheal, Celio, and Walrein. Walrein's the big one here, where 60 damage, and then during your next turn, Ice Ball does 60 more damage. Seen it before. We have Snorunt into Frostlass and Glalie. Obviously, two different cards, but Glalie does Ice Fang 50 and Paralysis. Frostlass does Ice Beam for 70, a little bit less HP. And this rounds out our Elite Four, where we have Glacia, who increases the damage done by Glalie, Frostlass, or Walrein by 30. Kind of like obviously, that Blaine effect, but for different water cards. And especially since they're all cheap too, like Walrein can be rare candied, which would be super helpful. You could probably get away with putting a Manaphy in this deck if you have like that way you can power up Snowrun and Spheal at the same time, maybe, and you don't feel bad about Manaphy going down instantly. Okay, then we have all the cast forms. We have normal cast form, rain, sunny, and snowy. The colorless one, the normal one, is the best one because for 2 colorless, it does 50 damage. But if your opponent's active Pokemon has a weakness to fire, water, or fighting, this move targets that weakness. Basically, Weather Ball changes its type depending on the weather, where, you know, sun, rain, hail slash snow, or sand would change its type. Obviously, Castform doesn't have a sand form, and with rain and snow being water and ice, that those being the same type in the TCG, it kind of makes sense where it would be like, okay, fire for the sun, water for the rain and snow, and then fighting for the sand. That way, it does 20 more damage to anything that has that weakness. And then we have the 3 other forms where, these 2 are pretty basic, just and I think these are solid. Like these are like far-fetched kind of cards where it's 70 HP instead of 60, but they do 30 damage, 40. And then the snow one, because it's also a water type, wanted to be slightly different. So it just does 10 damage to all of the bench. Then we have into Beldum and Matang. Beldum does a colorless, Matang metal. Then we have Metagross EX, who for 1 energy does 30, but with 3 energy, it can deal 100 damage, and if you flip a coin, it does 40 more damage. With 190 HP, I think that's really good. I kind of wish this is what Dialga did, but they kind of put all of its, use into Metallic Turbo. But for a supporter, we have Steven, who allows you to take 2 metal energy from your energy zone and attach it to one of your basic Pokemon. So Beldum, Aron, any Registeel, Skarmory, anything like that. Mawile, EX even. Those will all be super helpful. And then obviously your turn it, like a Kiawe. Then we have Latios and Latios, who both use Psychic, but because Latios is red, it has fire, and because Latios is blue, it has water. I kid you not, that's literally why they do that. um, but they each have their assist ability, which was used previously that I kind of liked, where it allows you to attach a psychic energy to the opposite one. So if Latios is in the active spot, you attach a psychic energy to a Latios. And Latios, if it's in the active, you attach a psychic energy to Latios. I think this is really helpful, especially that we should only run water and fire in the deck of these 2. And they only deal 100 damage, but break that's 130 secondary effect. And then we have alternate versions of the Regis, which I will admit, I almost didn't want to include these because I think the other ones we got are just so much better. But I still made them anyway for the sake of saying, I did every single Gen 3 Pokemon, with the exception of Azurill, because we already have Meryl and Azumarill, and an Azurill card doesn't exist, so I'm not going to add Azurill. That doesn't make sense. Same thing with why we don't have Badoo. So they're kind of weird about the babies. So yeah, so I wanted to include these, I guess. And honestly, what I might do, I'm not even kidding, I might just make EX versions of them, maybe for like a what I have this. I had this deck labeled as B1 just so it could be timeless essentially. So then for a B1A, I could then make the EX versions of the Regis. It might be neat, and then that way I could include Regidrago, Regieleki, and maybe a Regigigas EX too. But I just decided to make these because why not? Then we have Jirachi EX, Flip 5 coins. One of your opponent's Pokemon is chosen at random for each head. A chosen Pokemon takes 60 damage, kind of like a Draco Meteor. Obviously, this is Steven compatible. It's also very likely that you want to put this with Dialga. Oh, that's another good point. You could run Steven and Dialga, like turn 1, and that way on turn 3 when you're ready to attack, or going second. Actually, no, because you turn in that. Um, but if you're going first, you use Steven, you put 2 energy on the Dialga. On your next turn, you're ready to immediately Metallic Turbo. I think that's really helpful. And so Jirachi really wants either Steven or that Metallic Turbo. That way you can at most deal 300 damage randomly. So I think this is a pretty fun idea. Then Deoxys. Now with this Deoxys, these are the only cards I did not give a rarity to, because my idea was that these would be uh the drop event bonus, an entire dedicated Deoxys deck. So with Deoxys EX, its ability allows you to take the ability of any other, Deoxys, and then it does 3 energy for 90. So looking at these other Deoxys, defense form, if it's in the active spot, reduces all damage done by your opponent's active Pokemon by 20. Attack form increases all damage done by your Pokemon by 20. And speed form reduces all of your retreat cost by 2. So, once per turn, Deoxys EX can copy any one of these. I think is a good effect. So it's Deoxys changing form. So, when you're ready to attack, you grab the attack form. Next thing you know, this is doing 110 damage. Or if you want to live a hit, that might be helpful. You switch to the defense form. If you want to retreat, you could then go to the speed form, and you now have no retreat. And that is all of the cards that I have made. I believe the total is over 150. You would have saw it in the first part. Sorry this took so long. I've been busy with life, but let me know what you guys think about these. I think a lot of these are really fun ideas. I know some of you might not like the sameness of some of the abilities, like with Armaldo and Aggron, where if they have a tool, they take less damage. I I'm sorry. It's something I wanted to see more out of. I tried to spice it up a bit with like Flygon and Tropius, but it's really something I wanted to see in Space Time Smackdown. So when making this set, I wanted to make more of what I wanted out of the game, and that is simply just better passive synergy with Pokemon tools, especially when some of the Pokemon tools are very universal, like Giant Cape and Rocky Helmet, that kind of thing. So I hope you enjoyed. Um, Let me know what you guys think. I am more than, I am willing to change some of these if some of you have a better idea. I think Volby Nilumize, I want something a little bit more. Obviously, these Reggies especially. I wanted to do something slightly different from what we got in Space Time Smackdown. Regirock and Regice are the same because the Space Time Smackdown ones obviously have an ability, whereas Reggie still didn't. So I gave this one just like 2 energy because I think the other one to attack. Um, but I feel very proud of these. I think there's a lot of very cool. I wanted to make these uh deck first, essentially. So that's why there is a lot of, supporters, for these specific Pokemon. Like, Norman has Slacking, Spinda, and Linoon. Brendan and May have the starters. Winona is obviously like the Altaria, the Swallow, and the Pelipper. I wanted to make these as a deck. Obviously, Steven now having, a deck, and then Glacia right here have ice types. It's just something I wanted to see more out of. I think there's a lot of potential. I know water types aren't doing the best right now, and so I'm hoping that with something like Glacia, as well as Kyogre and the Team Aqua and Archie and all that, that it's going to be better. Who I think it was Zatumi Zen. he suggested a Poke Tool for water types that reduces their damage. I fully agree. I 1000% agree. I just obviously didn't make it for this. I wanted to do something different. So I'm hoping there's something here for every type to give it some synergy. Like, for example, this Banette. This Banette I originally made, to work with Giratina EX. Because it's like, oh, Giratina just kind of ends its turn once it takes an energy. Maybe if there was a way that, you could still do damage without ending your turn. That's why I have Banette's ability be this. And it ended up working really well with Dusknoir and Dust EX. So I really like that. Again, Gorbis and Huntail were kind of like kind of iffy on, not quite a replacement to Manaphy, but the kind of like the idea there, as well as with Kyogre, stuff like that. So I do like a lot of these. I'm sure a lot of you guys will too. So thanks for watching. Let me know what you guys think. I may do more of this, hopefully a lot faster. Thanks for watching. Enjoy. Share this video, whoever you want to see it. I am open to anybody reacting to it. I am open to anybody telling me that all my ideas are dog crap. That's fine. I don't care. So thanks for watching, and as always, stay frothy.